The Russian fleet has been renamed to At the Bottom. Ukraine has achieved the impossible. For the first time, naval drones set course for Russian ports and Crimea. A harsh revenge for Kyiv. Zelensky gave the order. Moscow is being plunged into darkness. Putin has played himself into a corner. Our forces delivered a mirror response to the enemy on the front at Berezvykashchi. A frontline clash that dragged Putin's army into the abyss. Everything was leading up to this. Tomahawks have been launched, heading your way. You will be shocked. Russia is stripping its weapons depots down to bare walls. The Kremlin's last gasp. All this and more in our report, Critical Point. This is 3 UAVs. Right now, drones are flying toward the Black Sea Fleet, ready to turn it to ashes. Our forces went in hard. The Kremlin is urgently switching to alert mode. This mega weapon accelerated over 5,000 kilometers. The Russian coastline is in its sights. Is something mega powerful being prepared? Ukrainian base crews breaking through the defenses. The Black Sea is boiling from the strikes. A crown of victory for the armed forces of Ukraine. Our unit that is pushing the enemy into a hopeless abyss. This is something you have to see with your own eyes.
The last days of the Russian Black Sea Fleet are approaching. The occupiers have less and less time before their defeat. This week, Ukraine marks the 3rd anniversary of the first strike on the Crimean Bridge. On October 8, 2022, a powerful explosion occurred on the crossing, seriously damaging the road surface and the railway line. It was then that Ukraine saw the emergence of an entirely new and unique branch of the military, along with its own advanced type of weapon, naval drones.
As a result of the incident, vehicle traffic on the Crimean Bridge was stopped.
At that moment, the whole world learned what Ukrainian naval drones are capable of.
Ukraine demonstrated the capabilities of its naval drones. There is probably a picture of what they look like. These naval drones are an effective weapon.
Over the past 3 years, Ukrainian naval UAVs have become the masters of the Black Sea. Meanwhile, the Black Sea Fleet, so highly praised by Putin, is forced to hide from our drones in remote ports.
This is, in essence, a kind of army of the future. This is the very element that allows for the preservation of human life, that enables more effective work.
The effectiveness of modern Ukrainian naval weaponry is hard to deny. Time and again, they manage to break through enemy defenses and make their way into Russian ports and bays.
Drones, even in the air, are very clearly visible from the ground, as are robots, including automatic cannons. You can see how they fire aimed shots, that is, by eye. And they still can't hit it. And this is despite the fact that it's perfectly lit, clearly visible, and moving relatively close by. But they still can't hit it. It's a total disaster.
And with every new attack on Russian warships, Ukrainian drones are becoming more and more advanced technologically.
And of course now they'll be hitting the entire chain, simply because the Ukrainians have really committed to this task. They're succeeding. You can see that the system on the enemy side is literally failing. So why not give it a try?
Now, Putin no longer possesses a single remote naval base in the Black Sea where the bunker-dwelling leader could effectively conceal his entire fleet from persistent Ukrainian drones. They have just signed a cooperation agreement with American partners, which gives Ukraine the opportunity to acquire an entirely new type of drone, ground-effect vehicles with a range of almost 5,000 kilometers and a payload capacity of 1 ton.
We have agreed to cooperate within the float and fly concept, and we also plan to jointly develop solutions to increase the speed and stability of our products. We are interested in developing production on the territory of Ukraine, as well as organizing training for our weapons specialists.
This news has triggered another wave of panic in the Kremlin. Now every military vessel and every single Russian army base in the Black Sea is in the crosshairs of the Ukrainian armed forces.
We can clearly see that the increasing number and significantly improved quality of these advanced drones now effectively allow Ukrainian soldiers to strategically vary their operational use and meticulously create the optimal right mix of different types of drones in order to successfully achieve their critical objectives.
And Ukrainian soldiers, more than anyone else, know how to achieve their goals by any means necessary. It's no coincidence that they are setting global trends in naval operations. Ukraine's maritime drones have prompted other countries to adopt similar technologies. Today, our unmanned boats are the main participants in modern exercises conducted by Portugal. In front of representatives of NATO naval forces, with the involvement of dozens of defense and technology companies and their experimental weapons, a 3-week battle is being held for control over a notional 10,000 square miles of ocean. As a result of the prolonged sea battle, Ukrainian drones demonstrated their highest effectiveness. Now, according to military experts, the experience gained from the exercises will be scaled up in the Black Sea.
Ukraine has received, and this is clearly and unequivocally confirmed by all the recent and unfolding events, an exceptionally effective weapon to decisively fight against the long-standing Russian naval monopoly. In fact, we have essentially undermined that monopoly.
If a year ago Ukrainian drones had effectively driven the Russian fleet out of Sevastopol, now it will have no peace at all. And in Novorossiysk, the Kremlin can't keep up with Ukraine's new maritime technologies. While Russian sailors are training to shoot at surface targets, Magura drones, for example, are being equipped with machine guns, anti-aircraft and anti-ship missiles. Some of them even serve as miniature aircraft carriers, acting as platforms for launching drones.
Similar drones can be of various different types, and moreover, they can be effectively utilized in a coordinated swarm method to confidently inflict significant damage upon the enemy fleet, thereby ensuring a decisive advantage.
By invading Ukraine in 2014, Putin provoked a whole revolution in naval warfare. Over the past 3 years, Ukraine has completely rewritten the course of such battles. And Western experts are already comparing its contribution to the development of naval forces to such technological breakthroughs of their time as the construction of submarines or even the advent of steam replacing sails on ships.
Right at this moment, the Russian army is fleeing from the Dnipropetrovsk region. Our forces drove the enemy out. Live on air, they showed footage of retribution that struck the Russians with explosive force. Near Zaporizhia, our forces hit the enemy's communications hub with artillery. Putin's mercenaries scattered in all directions like rats. Our troops had prepared a mega surprise, a frontline meat grinder at the hottest section of the front. The first details, don't miss what's next.
Time is not on the Kremlin's side. And in a prolonged standoff, Ukraine's chances of winning the war are much higher than Putin's. This is the conclusion reached by Western journalists after visiting the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces. Ukraine's strategy in a war of attrition is showing unexpected results.
Armored combat vehicles haven't exactly become obsolete, but they have almost no chance of any success. Even when these forces are concentrated into fists, they still have almost no chance of breaking through.
Analysts say that the constant losses suffered by the enemy and the adaptation of the Ukrainian armed forces to modern combat tactics open up opportunities for Kyiv's long-term victory. Russia was counting on a rapid advance in northeastern Ukraine. However, key cities and logistical hubs remain under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. In the fall of 2025, Russian generals are capturing Ukrainian cities and villages only in words and in fake reports for the bunker.
Well, it's quite clear that the Russian army most likely will not be able to successfully accomplish these particular tasks. But General Gerasimov, the chief of the General Staff, again, according to certain files that appeared online on social media, reported to Putinovich about the latest successes of the Russian troops. For example, he emphatically claimed that the significant grouping of the Ukrainian armed forces in the critical area of the Hleban Bek reservoir had been completely destroyed, which is absolutely not true at all. And in addition to all of this, he further claimed that Russian military troops are actively clearing the southern districts of the city of Kupiansk, which is also completely and utterly not true at all.
What is actually happening in long-suffering Kupiansk was shown by operators of the 8th Special Operations Forces Regiment. The enemy in this direction really does not stop trying to break through the Ukrainian defenses. In the Kupiansk direction, there were at least 8 attempted attacks by the occupiers over the past day. However, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to thwart the enemy's plans to advance thanks to the defense forces. They repelled assault actions in the areas of Petropavlivka, Novoplatonivka, Pischane, and Stepova Novoselivka. With the use of strike FPV drones, the occupiers were driven into the nearest houses. After that, operators cleared several buildings where the enemy had taken cover. Things are tough for the occupiers today in the Zaporizhzhia direction as well. Partisans from the movement also helped destroy the enemy's mobile command post. Concerned citizens provided the exact coordinates of the occupiers' communications vehicle, which was being used as a mobile command post to control enemy units. The destruction of this communications hub caused chaos in the occupiers' command system. Coordination between units and the transmission of orders were disrupted, which seriously affected the enemy's combat capability in this sector of the front. And here are the shots of the occupiers burning fuel and lubricants depot in the northern Slobozansky direction. In the past few days, our border guards have managed to destroy enemy shelters and communication equipment. In addition, the enemy in the northern Slobozansky direction has suffered losses in manpower. In total, in this and the Kursk directions, Ukrainian defenders repelled 7 Russian attacks. The enemy carried out several airstrikes on our positions. In total, they dropped 10 guided bombs and conducted 198 artillery shellings. The situation in the Lyman direction remains difficult. There, the enemy attacked 12 times trying to advance, near the settlements of Serednya, Novoselivka and Dariluve. However, a special unit of Ukrainian military intelligence managed to accurately and effectively destroy the occupiers, their equipment and drones. Due to heavy losses in this and other directions, Russian forces have been forced to slow down their offensive pace. Military analysts explain, according to
the results of last month in September, the Russians' activity at the front, specifically the number of assaults they conduct, has somewhat decreased. Proportionally, the number of personnel losses is also declining.
The official Ukrainian statistics don't particularly motivate the occupiers to launch meat grinder assaults either. Indeed, September 2025 turned out to be notable in terms of the effectiveness of National Guard units. Thanks to the coordinated work of the guardsmen, the enemy lost at least 677 vehicles over the past month. 418 artillery systems, nearly 200 radar stations, 17 multiple launch rocket systems, 29 tanks, and almost 70 ammunition depots. Meanwhile, the Russian army continues to strike exclusively at civilians and residential buildings. And it's worth noting that this is happening not only in Ukraine. The other day, Russia's much-praised air defense system hit a residential building in the Belgorod region with a missile. The video shows that the upper floors of the residential building were hit. As a result, according to Russian media, windows were blown out in 15 apartments, about 20 parked cars were damaged, and officially there are no reported casualties. However, judging by the footage published online, the destruction of the building may be much more severe.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
The war has reached Moscow. The capital is on the edge. What a dramatic turn of events. Ukrainian drones keep striking relentlessly. Darkness covers Belgorod and Bryansk. The enemy's power grid is collapsing right before our eyes. The Kremlin is in panic. The countdown has begun. Revenge came quietly but precisely. Russian television speaks with a bright flash, a fireworks show with special effects. Blackout. Our forces are hinting. This is a warning. All the details of the massive strike coming up in the story.
8 airports closed. Fires from Topsy to Nizhny Novgorod. 251 drones over 16 regions of the Russian Federation. From the 5th to the 6th of October, Russia suffered the largest scale attacks by Ukrainian drones in the past 6 months. A strike was carried out on the thermal power plant in Klinsy, Bryansk region. There were power outages, and there was a blackout in Belgorod. Part of the city was left without electricity for a long time. And this is not the first time.
I'm glad I did.
Hello, dear friends. Based on the results of our emergency crews night work, our emergency services, the locations of incident and partial restoration, 24 critical points, 5,400 residents,
On the eve of winter and the heating season, Russia is once again routinely striking Ukraine's energy infrastructure. And now, for the first time in more than 3.5 years of war, Kyiv is not only threatening retaliatory strikes, but actually carrying them out. The president himself says this.
If they threaten a blackout, for example, in the capital of Ukraine, then the Kremlin should know there will be a blackout in the capital of Russia.
Actions that harm Ukraine provoke a symmetrical response. This also applies to the energy sector.
Absolutely right, the president said. We will find both the opportunity and the weapons, and we will carry out these operations. They will definitely understand that in this way they will not achieve an advantage. Any Russian action will definitely be met with a response. Andriy Hanatov, chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
A blackout in Russian regions and even in Moscow is entirely possible, and there are several reasons for this. One of them, of course, is strikes on the power system, and the other is the sanctions that are already in effect. And accordingly, it becomes impossible to purchase spare parts and equipment, while the existing ones degrade and become unfit for operation.
Russia's energy sector today is a powder keg. The capacity deficit reaches 25 gigawatts. This is not an isolated failure, but a systemic collapse. And this is even before any systematic strikes have occurred, which Russia itself will bring closer with its actions against our energy sector. Instead of investing in its own thermal and hydroelectric power plants, Moscow is losing reserves due to sanctions and the obsolescence of equipment. Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation.
If Ukraine starts systematically striking thermal and hydroelectric power plants across all regions of the Russian Federation, as happened in the Belgorod region on the night from Sunday to Monday, it will be very difficult to restore Russia's energy sector. Currently, 42 regions of the Russian Federation have already introduced consumption restrictions during peak hours. In the center of the country, in Siberia and in the Far East, there is an energy shortage everywhere. And that's even without any capacities being knocked out. When the Russians destroy Ukraine's energy sector, we have a safety net. We receive kilowatts from the EU, as well as spare parts for restoration. For its part, the Russian Federation does not have such assistance. Their local energy workers can only rely on themselves. And as the latest strike by the armed forces of Ukraine showed, winter in Russia can be very dark and cold.
Washington has delivered a blow that no one expected. Trump is making a decision that changes the game. Ukraine will receive Tomahawks. Moscow is in shock, there is panic in the Kremlin, and the air smells of revenge. Putin understands that this is the beginning of the end. American weapons have become a sword of retribution, already aimed at the very heart of the empire. The world stands on the threshold of a new era, and it begins right now. Don't miss it.
US President Donald Trump has almost made the decision to provide Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles.
If you think about it, I've practically made the decision already. I think so. I'm curious to find out what they will do with them, where they're going to send them. Maybe I should ask about that.
At the end of last week, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin stated that the supply of American long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine would lead to an entirely new level of escalation, particularly in relations between Moscow and Washington. Putin called the missiles not entirely modern and noted that providing these missiles to Ukraine would not change the balance of power on the battlefield.
It might not be Tomahawks, and I'll say that I'm still not 100% sure. Right now it seems more likely than not. But the very fact that not only were Trump's words changed, but also that information appeared in the media space, that the US understands a much wider range of weapons they can sell to their European partners for Ukraine, is significant. This really does change the rules of the game, and it's yet another form of pressure on Putin's inner circle. They are being made to clearly understand that if they were hoping a change of power in the US would mean no Tomahawks, then a change of power in the US could actually mean Tomahawks for Ukraine, which could end up coming your way.
The transfer of missiles could be delayed by several months. This was written by Yehor Chernev, the head of the permanent delegation of the Verkhovna Rada to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly.
Because first and foremost, this is a means of putting pressure on Putin and an attempt to force him to negotiate, and only then is it about strengthening our military capabilities. Trump did not say by accident that he has almost made up his mind, that he does not want escalation, and that he wants to clarify how these missiles will be used.
Chernev assures that the transfer of Tomahawks to Ukraine is a test for Putin and may be divided into stages. At each of these stages, Putin will be given the opportunity to retreat and enter into negotiations. Therefore, most likely the supply and use of the missiles will be very gradual.
Tomahawk is a well-known term, and that's why we're discussing it. But the point is, there is another type of missile which, as far as I know, might even be better than the Tomahawks. The Tomahawks are not a new addition, they are quite old missiles. And these newer missiles, about which no one has told me anything yet, if they are also supplied to Ukraine, will undoubtedly be a huge problem for Russia.
Putin's lies about negotiations could result in the transfer of Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. This opinion was expressed by former US Special Representative Kurt Volker. Volker believes that Russian President Vladimir Putin personally let down the American president. This refers to Putin's promise to Trump to hold negotiations with Zelensky, which Trump announced at the White House after meeting with Putin in Alaska.
I think there are indications. One of these indications, by the way, is the ongoing strikes on Russia, not all of them military factories. Let me remind you, Trump's predecessor, Biden, who supported Ukraine, at the same time said, no, let's not strike Russian targets, and Ukraine stopped doing it. Donald Trump did not support Ukraine in the same way. Moreover, during the first half of the year, many even thought he was more pro-Russian than pro-Ukrainian. Now, however, he is changing his approach a bit, maybe even drastically. Nevertheless, as analysts point out again, there are no restrictions for Ukraine.
Military analysts are writing that Ukraine will be given Tomahawks, and as a result, nearly 2,000 Russian military and industrial targets could come under threat. From Chekedi oil depots to bombers in Engels.
The Russian Federation is coming apart at the seams. The Kremlin is in panic, Putin is on the verge of a breakdown, the occupiers are grabbing at their last resources, but the front is collapsing before our eyes. There are only a handful of tanks left, the warehouses are empty, and the factories are in despair. The Russian army is spiraling into the abyss without weapons or motivation. China, which just yesterday was feeding the Kremlin, is now ready to cut off its oxygen. Supplies are being cut off, and with them, Moscow's hopes are fading. And that's not all. Scandals in the military-industrial complex are erupting one after another. The complete collapse of the empire is no longer a matter of time, but a matter of hours. Be the first to witness this.
Russian tanks are on the verge of extinction. It seems the Russian military-industrial complex can't cope, and soon there will be nothing left to fight with at all. And it appears the reason is the sanctions.
The role of sanctions here is greater because, after all, this is a deterrent, this is growth. It worsens both the prices and the quality of the products that Russia manufactures. In the long term, it weakens the implementation of technologies like artificial intelligence, which Russia could have adopted.
The strong Russian economy that the Kremlin talks about is starting to show a noticeable crack.
Sooner or later, the significant overheating of the war economy may very well lead not just to a period of stagnation, but potentially to a sharp and severe decline. C. The general economic trends in the Russian Federation will also affect the military sector of the economy.
It seems that, for the first time since 2022, salaries have started to fall at Russia's most important enterprises. So yes, we're talking about companies in the military-industrial complex.
Undoubtedly, the lending to enterprises in the military-industrial complex has an impact. And the form of this lending, the large-scale lending from the non-military sector. This used to be a plus, but now it's working against them. In fact, they've either reached their peak or a plateau or are about to.
But how do staffing shortages and economic problems affect the growth of Russia's military-industrial complex?
The ability of the Russian economy to supply the army, to provide equipment and ammunition for the war. They are not unlimited either, especially when it comes to rapid expansion. In the current Russian economy, they may be able to reach Soviet-era levels.
Of course, this is not without its drawbacks, especially when it worsens the condition and quality of military equipment, or may even completely halt its new production. But here, Soviet-era tanks come to the rescue.
The focus was placed on restoring Soviet equipment, old Soviet equipment from storage bases. Restoration would help again, as would refurbishing and preparing them for combat. But those are not unlimited either.
And now the time has come when old equipment doesn't make the job easier, but rather complicates it.
There are fewer and fewer units that can actually be repaired. They have to repair things that aren't really repairable, to take them apart and assemble one working unit from several.
As a result, instead of producing new and modern equipment, Russia is increasingly relying on old and worn-out machinery.
The production of new equipment is hindered by sanctions, among other things, as well as by the unpreparedness of the manufacturing base. Don't
forget about Putin's loyal friends, China and Iran. They are actually helping him a lot.
But however,
any arms supply is more a way for Beijing to keep Moscow on a short leash.
That's precisely why the Chinese leadership helps Moscow from the powerful position of a suzerain state. That's why they consistently keep their hand firmly on the tap. If Moscow acts properly and in accordance with their wishes, they might then consider opening the tap.
But in the end, what do we have today? It is known that in 2024, the military industry has reached the limits of its capabilities. But what are Russia's prospects now? Maybe...
This is the price, as we call it. That is, when the maximum indicators have been reached, further growth is impossible, but it is possible to avoid a decline through administrative means.
The only question is, how long will the Kremlin be able to maintain this level? And could it turn out that the unexpected blow will come not from the front, but from within?
Corruption in Russia is our ally. The more the generals and the leaders of the Russian military-industrial complex keep stealing, the less chance they have of staying at this level. Well, as long as they're stealing, they're doing pretty well for themselves. With each passing year...
But of course, sanctions are only a small part of what can help Ukraine defend itself against the Russian Federation. At the same time, ramping up Ukrainian production of military equipment is also an important factor.
you can't believe that sanctions alone will solve everything here. In other words, we also need to develop our own production and respond to attacks with counterattacks. That's the only way. Sanctions are just an alternative to weapons, but not a substitute for them. So we need to focus on both.
And that's not all. This was me, Draina Hutsakalo, with you. Even more hellish news in our next episode. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon. See you soon.